Good morning. Welcome. I hope you all can hear me. Before we begin, if you're listening in English, please turn on the English channel on the bottom of your screen. In Spanish, do the same in Spanish. Good morning and welcome. I'm Alex Gartenfeld. I am the Artistic Director at the Institute of Contemporary Art, Miami. I am moderating today, and I hope that our four panelists can open their video as well and join us for the duration of the talk. Thank you. It's an honor to, as part of the ArtBo program, bring together a group of people who are leading conversations, as well as institutional engagement and collective action in order to address today's preeminent global crisis, which is that of the environment and carbon impact. Climate change and decarbonization are issues the world over, but Colombia is also a specifically rich context, given its ecology and the presence here of some large-scale conservation partnerships. I'm glad we can have this conversation this morning within the umbrella of ArtBo. I have to confess to being somewhat recent to accelerating IC Miami's commitments to decarbonization. Haley Mellin on this panel, whom I've known for quite a long time, came to me this spring to brief me on some of the great work that she's been doing with Art to Acres. IC Miami had previously received an inaugural round of grants dedicated to sustainability from the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation in order to analyze our systems and take the first steps towards being more sustainable with the assistance of GCC's online carbon calculator and Haley. We're now additionally auditing current and forthcoming exhibitions for Chakaya Booker and Hugh Hayden in order to raise our awareness of the impact of these exhibitions on the environment in order to act proactively in the future. We're now members of GCC and committed to the reduction of our waste and the compensation of our emissions. Thanks to Haley for being my gateway and for bringing together this amazing group of colleagues. Thanks also to Felipe and to Luis for your support in organizing this program. This past year has seen a rather dramatic increase in collective action in the art world, although I think that there's still a lot to communicate about these conversations to a broader public. That means a lot of the practices being discussed today are emerging and tools in the process of being developed. And today's talk will represent some of these kind of very exciting and hopeful formative stages. The panelists here represent a variety of organizations and approaches. Many of these involve a pledge to reduce our sector's carbon emissions, often by at least 50% by 2030, in line with the Paris Agreement, as well as a reduction of waste and a movement towards carbon-free energy sources. But there are a variety and a diverse portfolio of other activities that institutions are undertaking as well. I'll let each of the panel members elaborate on the specificity of their role and platform. I think it's also significant that each of our speakers has a hybrid role as an arts worker and an activist in the field. I want to acknowledge their diligent work on innovation and social responsibility, which should be at the center of the art world's practices and our leadership in a broader ecology and economy. I'll now introduce, and it's my pleasure to do so, Laura Lupton, who is co-founder of Galleries Commit, co-founder of Artist Commit and a partner in Barter.art. Siobhan Bradley is co-founder and team leader of GCC Los Angeles chapter. Carl Johns, who is the co-founder of Hauser and Wirth Sustainability Steering Committee and also a co-founder of GCC LA. And Haley Mellin, a member of GCC LA, co-founder of Art to Acres and a co-founder as well of LA MoCA's Environmental Council. Thanks to each of you for joining us. I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce their programs and platforms a bit to our audience at large for about 5 to 10 minutes or however long is needed, because these are really some quite important issues. I'll then pose some questions, and at the very end, if there's time, we'll take some limited questions from the audience. Thanks again for being with us. I'm excited to convene this conversation. Laura, I've given you the heavy responsibility of going first. Thank you for sharing a little bit about the three organizations that you're a part of, and also if I can be of help in stewarding any specific issues about any of these each of these organizations, let me know as well. Happy to intervene if I can. Take it away, Laura.
Hi, thank you, Alex, for moderating this panel. And also thank you, Haley, for inviting me to be a part of it. My name is Laura Lupton. I'm an arts gallery worker that's based in New York, although I'm currently logging in from London, a very rainy London. I'm here representing a few different things that I'm involved in. So as Alex mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Galleries Commit, which is a gallery worker-led collective committed to a climate-conscious, equitable, and resilient future for New York City galleries. I'm also a co-founder of Artist Commit, which is kind of a sister initiative that emerged out of Galleries Commit, but is an artist-led collective committed to a climate-conscious, equitable, and resilient future for New York City galleries. Galleries Commit, Artists Commit operate independently. They have their own initiatives. They have their own amorphous group of collective leadership that kind of decides what each of them are doing. Some of the initiatives that Galleries Commit is currently working on, we have a climate action database that tracks either actions, resources, ideas for actions that galleries are doing throughout the New York space, but also other spaces that end up coming into our framework. We maintain a collective large-scale land conservation partnership with Art to Acres to encourage galleries to come together for kind of a single large-scale collective initiative in climate action. We've also created a proposed gallery climate action plan, which is a template for galleries to be able to use. Currently, Galleries Commit and Artists Commit are actually working together on a collaborative pilot initiative of climate impact reports. These aim to promote conversation and collaboration between both Galleries Commit and Artists Commit by providing artists and their presenting partners, whether that presenting partner is a gallery or a museum or some other institution, a framework for better understanding the climate impact of an exhibition, an event, or some other project they do together. Those are kind of in a test pilot mode right now and have been some of the most impactful work that we've been doing so far. I can talk more about that later if it's interesting. But finally, I'm also here representing Barter.art, an online platform founded by my business partner, Jay Cho, and I, that is essentially a peer-to-peer resource sharing tool for the art world. It's designed to promote circular economies and activate material reuse within our sector. Maybe I will actually just share my screen while I talk about this so that you can see kind of exactly what it is I'm talking about. So Barter is an online tool where you can post material that you want to offload or source material that you need for less. At the same time, freeing up valuable storage space without having to send material to landfill or sourcing items from other people's existing inventory instead of having to produce new objects. So it was founded with the desire to end the wasteful one-off cycle of duplication and destruction that a lot of us were seeing in our galleries and art studios and museum spaces by proposing a new type of infrastructure that's really rooted in community networks that encourage a sense of circular economies and reuse instead of waste. Barter is currently in a beta mode, and we are really piloting kind of a launch within existing community networks, including some of the communities that are on this call, that invest in a more circular economy. Stop sharing. Yes, I'll probably talk a little bit more about all three of those, but I'll keep this intro somewhat concise and see where the conversation goes, see where people are most interested in hearing more about it. And I'll just leave it there and say I'm excited to be here. Haley, Carly, Siobhan, you guys are all trusted collaborators and frequent conversation people at this point, so I'm excited to be able to talk in this space, Jill.
Thank you, Laura. Really appreciate it. Siobhan, if you don't mind presenting next your work with GCCLA.
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me on this panel this morning. To talk quickly about myself, I work at Roberts Projects, which is a gallery in Los Angeles. I've been working in the art world for about 13 years, whether it be in a gallery or with an art fair or working for individual artists. And while this is such an exciting industry to work in, it's impossible to ignore the waste and excess that kind of comes hand in hand with it. You know, having throughout my career made like little efforts here and there, like, starting a recycling program at one gallery, or you know, switching an office to non-toxic cleaning materials, it really takes like a coordinated, massive group effort to make a significant difference. And so when Gallery Climate Coalition was founded in October of last year, that kind of became, to me, like the answer to that problem of how to make these efforts so coordinated. So I'll talk a little bit more about what Gallery Climate Coalition is. You gave a brief intro, Alex, but I'll just expand on that a bit. So Gallery Climate Coalition was founded by a group of galleries in London just a year ago. They've reached out to Los Angeles to start a chapter, and we quickly came to back in July. The mission of Gallery Climate Coalition, as you said, Alex, is to reduce our industry's emissions by 50% by 2030, in line with the Paris Agreement. Some ways that we're working on doing that are, one, offering the carbon calculator, which will give galleries a sense of, what your starting point is with your emissions. We can't reduce by 50% if we don't know what the base level is. So that's something that our members are working on and looking to work towards a deadline of November 1st to at least complete for 2019, which is kind of the last typical year for our industry. And, GCCLA is partnering with companies like Barter so that we can reduce our waste by reusing materials like pedestals, frames, crates, as Laura mentioned. We're researching and sourcing alternative packing materials in LA. But most of all, what I feel we've kind of learned is that in our industry, there are so many people across the board, from gallerists to shippers, who are really passionate and authentic about wanting to become sustainable, but don't know how. So Gallery Climate Coalition LA and all of us, we're just working on how to answer that question, like, how do you become sustainable? So while our group is quite youthful, we've only existed since the summer, I feel, we're really working hard on that and making some good progress.
Thanks, Siobhan. Much appreciated. Carl, if you don't mind continuing upon our Los Angeles thematic.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to everybody. And I have done extensive work already with Laura and Siobhan and Haley. And that's the one thing that I want to emphasize to anybody who's getting started in this, is that it's been a really, I think, kind of unprecedented, wonderful opportunity to connect throughout the industry. And this is like, I don't know, it ends up relating to numerous other topics as well, but that's been one of the greatest things. So, it's probably clear from the first two that we're at the beginning of this journey. It's been something that's been on somebody's, most of our minds for a long time, but as Siobhan pointed out, it's just like, how do we get started? So, and it's really been new revelations every few months about what's possible. So I've been with Hauser & Wirth I was with them for close to 6 years in New York. I've been in the art world for, I guess it's like 17 years. And recent transplant to LA. And my work with on this topic started, I guess, in 2019. So the gallery engaged a consultant, ERM, to start going through all of our locations and analyzing all of our processes. And this is an important thing. I would, if it's the carbon calculator, or if you're able to hire a consultant, it's a great first step to just really measure where you are and what's possible. We made the commitment to Paris climate earlier this year, and then we hired a really fantastic global head, Cleona Murphy, who's been a driving force for this. And now we're getting to work at just what we can do at each location. So this has involved, like, we're a different case a little bit than in a lot of galleries because we have multiple locations around the world. So we have a whole governance group and steering committee. So in North America, I work a lot with New York and LA. So I'm kind of, on that steering committee. And the big focus at the moment is looking at our buildings, looking at energy consumption, and also air travel and air freight. But we have a lot of other subcategories below this. There's a lot of work being done to rethink packaging and all sorts of shipping related things, as well as, you know, I guess just waste management in general. I'll say that in terms of the connecting with people, it's been pretty great. Our green teams at the local level have inspired a lot of ideas, and it's really, I think throughout this whole thing, we're just trying to find ways to engage people. If people have ideas, they can go for it. If it's via like a plant-based dinner or a way to reduce waste in any way, or any type of conservation, we're sort of open to those ideas. Yeah, so I guess I would mention a little bit about what we're doing for our buildings. There's a big push to decarbonize. So, I mean, the first real step is to look at the efficiency of what you're doing. So, you know, this has to do with how well is your HVAC system working, your lighting system, do you have LED, how efficient is the building? There's, you know, a lot of savings cost-wise that can be made right away before you do anything else, and there are big carbon savings. And then, you know, we're trying to switch to renewable power as well. We have found a source for this in New York, but we're kind of at the beginning in Los Angeles. And this, like so many things, seems it's going to, you know, really collaboration is going to be key with things like power purchase agreements to get us better deals and access to greener power. And yeah, in addition to that, it's just kind of looking at policies in general in terms of air travel and shipping. Like so many things, the farther ahead that you plan, the more that you can save. So another thing I'd mention too, the gallery is signed up for science-based targets, which also I think can provide a really good pathway for businesses. So this is an independent organization where you can kind of register what your target is. So that's been really key for us as well. In addition, we're trying to involve artists in every way that we can and just hear what they want to do. And this has taken shape in a lot of great projects already. Haley can talk about it, but we did a plant-based dinner for Pipolati's recent exhibition at MoCA, as well as we've done print edition projects for charity Art to Acres. And there's a lot in the works that's coming. But all in all, it's been really exciting and inspiring. So, yeah.
Thank you for the great work, Carl. Haley, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Alex. Well, thank you to Carl and Siobhan and Laura and Alex for today, and for Lipe for putting it all together. I'm going to speak a little bit about the collaborativeness of all of these different initiatives. And as Carl noted, there's a strong surge in the last, I would say, 18 months of initiatives forming, getting members, and many people are part of a number of initiatives. This is a global surge, so that's quite nice. And I'll show a couple of these different sites. Let me share screen. So I'm currently in San Francisco. I'm an artist, and something called PACT has been formed recently, of which we're members. It's called Partners for Arts Climate Targets. And it echoes what Laura and Siobhan and Carl have been talking about, and how Alex introduced, which is really working on a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, if not earlier, transitioning to a zero waste sector, unifying visions, and centering on intersectional environmentalism and environmental justice. So I open this mostly to show that different initiatives that are forming and welcoming more initiatives all have monthly conversations, and there's really a nice like cohesion and consistency and flow in the collaboration of this sustainable space in the international art community. I founded an organization called Art to Acres, and the purpose of Art to Acres is to support the arts community, and that means artists, museums, galleries, collectors in their support of permanent large-scale land conservation for biodiversity, climate, clean drinking water reasons, watershed support, but also full ecosystem conservation. So the locations tend to be between 25,000 and 4 million acres per location. And Colombia is actually the place that we've supported the most conservation, around 5.5 million acres in the past 2 years. And I think one of the things that's really lovely about this is the connection between art, which is about legacy, about looking forward, about looking at what we are and thinking to a place when we're no longer here, and national parks, regional parks, community conserved areas, which are also about something you do now for a future point in time. So this is really a pleasure to get to work with a range of artists and institutions and matching funds partners in the conservation space. And I really want to commend Colombia as being a very forward-thinking country, being one of the few countries that has a carbon fuel tax, where every time you pump a liter of petrol, money goes to a fund for nature and for forest conservation, with trees being our oldest and most efficient resource for carbon sequestration. So with this in mind, as Laura mentioned, there's a Galleries Commit project currently with Art to Acres. This is actually in sister country of Peru. This is to conserve 200,000 acres of cloud forest into a regional conserved area that was actually just formally conserved a couple months ago. So this project is now complete. And this is a space where different galleries and museums and educational institutions globally are doing their first land conservation experience within the arts. So definitely a really great and important ecological and climate project, if you'd like to check it out. Next, I'm a co-founding member of Art and Climate Action, which is a local group in San Francisco, California. It's to support California-based sustainability. And it's just a group of arts workers coming together and starting to learn, do carbon calculations, talk about waste reuse. And so this is an example of how you can do something rather local, and it starts making a real difference and makes a community. I'm also a co-founder of the MoCA Environmental Council, as Alex and Carl mentioned, and the purpose of the council was to have the first environmental council of a US museum to support other museums, whether it's an institution of 2 staff members or a large institution, in starting to be sustainable and ecologically responsible. And one of the purposes of this council in particular is to fund upcoming exhibitions by climate activists, artists, etc. So I spend most of my time when I'm not painting on conservation and conservation contracts, but over the last 2 years in particular, I've been supporting institutions and galleries in doing their first carbon calculations, and I do this support pro bono. It's an incredible treat. And one of the things we look at is awareness in education, right? So carbon dioxide, something or that we don't think about, it's clear, we don't see it. And so in order to start thinking about it more and start being more aware of its presence in our every activity, we calculate it and we add it up. And so this in particular is a draft report for the Institute of Contemporary Art Miami, of which Alex is artistic director. Carrie, Kat, Isabella on the team were really crucial in putting together a spreadsheet of the metrics, and it's for the Shakaya Booker Show, which is currently up. And I open it up so you can just see a general approach as to how an internal carbon report looks. This was produced through the GCC calculator, which is a great tool for very easy assertion of what are your metrics? How much do you travel? What are your shipping metrics? And again, this is still in draft form because the exhibition's still up and we don't have the return shipping yet. But from this show, because it was local, because all the shipping was on the ground, and because there was just a couple flights, the carbon footprint was 11 metric tons, which is quite low. There can be gallery exhibitions that are a third this size that are maybe 50 metric tons. So it's quite a well thought through exhibition. And one of the reasons also we do this is so that then the museum can reflect and figure out how can we reduce that even further. Another example of one of these reports that is now complete we did for ARTA shipping, and this was where ARTA decided they wanted to take their entire international shipping carbon budget net zero, but mostly they just wanted to focus on how do they reduce for the next year. So one of the things we found from doing this report was that while the majority of their shipments were road shipments, 187,000 pounds against 131,000 pounds of air, the carbon really came from the air. So the question is, how do you keep those packages on the ground? So just a few thoughts there. Thank you, Alex.
No, thanks to each of you. That was really wonderful, and I think gives us a lot to begin our conversation with. First, I'm going to ask kind of almost a consumer style question, because I'm imagining, and we can't see the audience, but I'm assuming most people are collectors or art professional, art advisors, people who work at or own galleries. This may be an unfair assumption, but if you are one of those people and you're a participant in the art world, and you have not yet really begun the process of thinking about the carbon impact of your business, what is the best way to become educated and become involved in the short term? I'm going to ask this question primarily first to Laura and to Siobhan. You know, what are ways that people who are active participants in the art world, who share some of these values, what can they do to kind of begin the process of educating themselves and educating others about efficiency?
It's a great question, and especially for some of the stakeholders that you specifically pointed out, so collectors, other gallery workers, people that are kind of active in that space. And I'll answer two things. One, I think that if you're interested in environmental impact of the work that we're doing, one thing that we've really learned in the research that we've done, working with the communities that we've worked with, is really framing the importance of climate action into a few core categories. And so we always talk about climate impact when you're thinking about carbon emissions, but you're also thinking about waste reduction. You're also thinking about how to support people, making sure that the people within our spaces, our galleries, our museums, the artists and the studios we're working with have the headspace to even consider climate as a priority, because they're in places free of harassment, or they're being paid well, or they have other basic needs met. And also thinking about collective action. And collective action actually leads to what I would say the first thing, like the recommended step to take if you're interested in starting these conversations. We've all really started these conversations in the past couple of years, built on maybe years of previous conversations, but really diving in and learning. All of our organizations exist and have started to do that research, started to do that learning. We can share those tools. We have tools on our websites, but I would say the biggest thing I've learned, and I think some of you guys have also mentioned, is the benefit of having conversations around it and talking about it with other members of your own team, bringing it up with the coworkers you have, the galleries you work with, the artists that you support, and just bringing that up in a dialogue and conversation. I think that most of us, this is again, I shouldn't say most of us because we never know what most of us are, but we're all living on the planet right now, and we're all looking around and pretty aware that what's happening is something that needs to be taken seriously. And I find increasingly that it's not a conversation that is an inappropriate conversation to have within a workplace or within other social settings. And so having those conversations is the biggest thing I think to lead to the type of paradigm shift where it becomes just expected that we're shifting our business models, rather than like one person on a personal climate crusade to change things, but rather these conversations are natural and happening, and they've begun already. And because they've begun, we do have some resources now that maybe didn't exist a year ago to really help guide what we do with those decisions.
Yeah, I think Laura is totally on point that having these conversations goes a long way. And I think, you know, Carl and I had connected earlier in the summer, and he said something that felt really significant to me. That was that a few years from now, hopefully, you know, we think that we will look back on the way that we did things now and be just like mortified by it. That hopefully we'll be developing new practices that become like so natural and ingrained that this will seem foreign. But to answer to like, what can you do if you want to begin thinking about climate responsibility. One thing I can offer is that GCCLA is hosting an orientation on Friday, October 29th. And while that is, our outreach is really to Los Angeles arts organizations, anybody could join that. And we would encourage anyone who wants to get involved with GCC, whether it be in LA or anywhere in the world, would be perfectly welcome to sit in on that meeting. And at that meeting, we'll be talking about the carbon calculator. We will be sharing a checklist of kind of immediate actions that participants can take to reduce their emissions. And we'll be sharing what our own organizations have been doing so far. I think in a recent meeting, we kind of all briefly stated what our respective galleries and institutions have been working on, and it was so illuminating and inspiring. And I think if more galleries, artists, institutions, etc., were to hear what's already happening, it would, it almost gives you the feeling not only of encouragement, but necessity, and like, oh, this is a path I can easily be on. And it's not as daunting or mysterious or confusing as one might think. So.
Thank you. And also, it's my understanding that GCC there is looking at regional partnerships as well. So you're a chapter of GCC LA. What are other kind of organizations, galleries, museums across the world doing outside of the context in LA?
I'm sorry, could you maybe rephrase that question, like what other institutions are doing, or?
Sure, yeah. Well, because you and Carl are co-founders of GCC in LA, are there partner kind of national, regional groups, and how are you seeing other practices develop in other places?
Sure. So GCC has chapters in Berlin, London. I think that the chapters in Brazil and Italy are in the process of forming. I know that Berlin, it seems their group kind of came together so naturally and was immediately able to work on, one thing I know that they're doing is like a crate reuse program that they kind of were able to like instantly set up, kind of similar to Barter. But that seems like it's working out great for them. To speak to what exactly other groups are doing, I can't answer that with so much concrete information because I think that I've been so focused on us. But I do see regional partnerships as being really valuable, particularly in the US. I think I would love to see like a GCC New York chapter pop up. In the US, for example, every shipment that we send from Los Angeles to anywhere in the middle of this country goes to New York and then back. So say you were shipping a painting from Los Angeles to Miami, chances are it's going LA to New York to Miami. And in reverse going the same way. So to me, the idea of having other chapters in this country would be really valuable because I think that that kind of, it lays the groundwork for more collaboration.
Thank you. Laura, you mentioned four categories, which a number of which I want to tease out a little bit further. The first was really kind of the values that are innate to some of the work that you're doing, and specifically the inextricability of our environmental condition with social conditions in the workplace, social justice, racial equity. Could you speak a little bit about how these platforms are intertwined within the work that you're doing as well?
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. I'll also just briefly respond to the question that Siobhan was talking about, because I do think that the Visual Arts Pact is a great tool for talking about what people are doing globally and the collaboration that's happening already. So the Visual Arts Pact has GCC, which is all of the cities, also Galleries Commit, Art to Zero, which is New York based, but doing work kind of across America, Key Culture, which is based in the Netherlands and New York, and is doing work more for cultural institutional spaces and museum spaces. Art Switch, which is also based in Europe here. So the visual arts path has really been kind of a platform for all of us to talk and make sure that kind of regardless who you're working with, if like GCC LA is in your city or Art Switch is like closest to you, the goals that we have, the conversations that we're having, they're aligned and they're all kind of, it's not like you're like working with one of us or the other. It's like we are all really aligned in what we're doing and kind of the tools that we're developing, the ways that we're I don't know, dividing and conquering to get to the end result as quickly as possible. But to return to the question that you just asked in terms of those 4 values and what it means to support people, this really came out of, I think, 2 reasons. One, so the Galleries Commit has always from the beginning been a worker-led collective that has emerged, and it really emerged from workers during 2020, partially because there was a break in our normal work patterns. And because of that break in our normal work patterns, we were able to focus on other things and have a moment to reflect critically about what our values were, where we wanted to be spending our time, what we loved about our jobs and loved about the art we were able to support, but also reflecting on ways in which the work that we wanted to do to support that art didn't always feel fully in line with our values and what we needed in order to survive in the future. So we think it's important to support people and have that really be framed as a critical part of climate action for 2 reasons. One, because people on your team are the people that are not just making climate action happen within your institutional space, but also that are going home at night and making decisions and how they show up as citizens of the world. And so making sure that you have workplace policies that support those people to be active citizens of the world and be active participants in workplace initiatives is critical. And then second, I would say it's because the same thought processes and value systems and infrastructures that lead to the climate crisis are really interconnected to the thought processes and value systems and infrastructures that lead to structural inequality within our workplaces or within our communities. So we can tackle the climate crisis, that's like one critical area, but a larger mindset shift and a larger kind of incorporation of what it means to think differently about extractive capitalism or extractive demands in general in our systems. Both of those things have to operate in parallel, we think, in order to truly achieve the type of paradigm shift that's required to tackle some of the climate crisis issues that we're facing right now.
Thank you. Laura, the 4th value that you mentioned, and forgive me in advance if I'm misrepresenting or missummarizing, that has to do with collective action. One species of that is an acknowledgement that our individual responsibility is part of broader structures. And one of the things that I find to be inspiring about the work that each of you is doing is that there are acknowledgements that we are working within systems, which perhaps have more power than we do. I know that that manifests in a number of ways. I'll use the word lobbying to describe that. All of you perhaps have touched on it in different ways, but Carl, I was going to ask you specifically because you mentioned, energy vendors and energy procurement. Could you maybe talk? Does this kind of, perhaps this value speaks a little bit to what you are doing and what others doing in terms of finding new ways to consume energy in ways that are more socially and environmentally responsible?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have to say that it was definitely a frustrating process when I started this last spring. You asked before about institutions and galleries globally. In the UK, our counterparts, with Hauser in the UK and in Switzerland, have more kind of off-the-shelf green power options. You can go to an energy broker there and have something that's a little more certified direct from the grid. In the United States, like so many things, it's kind of this, Wild West sort of thing where they're, Con Ed was offering an option in New York of 80 different vendors. And it took a long time to sort of sift through that. And a lot of these were claiming to be, there's a lot of marketing, people claiming to be 100% renewable. And when you actually start drilling down on the fine print, it's not exactly what it seems. but we did end up finding a vendor, but this has also led, this search has kind of been connecting with a number of others. And like Laura mentioned, the PACT group is very interested in solutions here. I've just started the process in Los Angeles, but there are a lot of committed parties. And yeah, it seems that it would be, hopefully at some point our governments will actually regulate this and provide us an easy option, because people want it. But until we have that, this power purchase agreement seems to be a really good pathway that we're exploring, to possibly have a lot of others in our industry gather together and go to energy brokers, and have this sort of purchasing power collectively. Because even though we think of ourselves as really large, like Hauser and Wirth is a big institution, it still is not, I guess, that big in terms of businesses and big corporations and consumption. So the more numbers we can have and the more buy-in we can have from others is really key. And like others have mentioned on this call, it just leads to other good things, really. Everybody can share what they do. And then there are all sorts of other wellness and equity issues that come up through this process.
Thanks, Carl. Siobhan, you've mentioned, I think, both in different ways, shipping and what might seem like prosaic things like packaging. Perhaps you could speak a little bit to some of your efforts to work within a group to kind of understand differently how we kind of organize some of our exhibitions and negotiate with some of our partners in putting those together.
Sorry. So as a registrar, packing and shipping is something that I've spent a lot of time on, and is something like kind of an area of this conversation that I'm most interested in. The packing and shipping area of our art world seems like a place where galleries need to be offered better options. And so GCCLA is working with shippers about how to provide better options. So in one area, GCC had done a lot of research on alternative packing materials, things such as plastic or films rather that are made of corn and beet starch, or packing foam that's made from mushrooms. And we're currently working on sourcing those materials in LA, and asking shippers to please start using them. We would like to see shippers support more sea freight. It sounds like that is something that has been hindered by COVID, being able to ship that way. So that kind of conversation is on pause for a brief moment, but we will be trying to work with shippers to provide that service, and also for fine art insurance policies to start covering art traveling that way. And we also are working with shippers with something kind of related to barter, or hoping to do so, where, let's take crates for an example. You use these crates like 1 or 2 times, and then like they get tossed into a landfill. And so barter is there to say, like, no, you can donate them, you can get crates for free, like via this website. The problem from, say, a gallery side is, well, like, we can't hold on to a crate for weeks waiting for somebody to pick up something that's like 90 inches by 80 inches by 6 inches. So we're like hoping to collaborate with shippers to store items at their facilities for free, and waive fees related to like releasing donated crates or processing donated crates coming in. So yeah, I feel that in the packing and shipping arena, it would really benefit us all for shippers to have better solutions. And this is another area where we've talked to so many shippers who are so very enthusiastic about adapting sustainable practices, but just don't know how. So we're hoping to show them how so that they can give us better options.
Thank you. That's really great to actually hear that there are enthusiastic partners out there. Haley, I wanted to ask you a few questions. We've been working so closely as you've been kind of unpacking the museum's carbon impact, and you shared with us the carbon calculator. And I can probably guarantee, as a relatively new user of the carbon calculator for our institution, that a lot of the material is not self-evident. It seems kind of complicated to look at a table. Could you maybe just explain for us or for the audience kind of what the biggest, in your observations, what the biggest kind of consumers of carbon are, and really kind of what the range of things you're looking at as you're working with institutions to assess their carbon impact. And I know there are others on this call involved with this process too, so feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's a really like ecosystemic situation. You want to look at your carbon, you want to look at your waste, you want to look at your sourcing of energy, as Carl mentioned. But in particular, in learning about carbon emissions, it's quite fascinating because, again, it's something we don't see. And so one of the things that I like to focus on is that it doesn't need to be terribly complex. You can focus on a couple key areas. And by honing in on those areas, you can actually make significant changes that reduce your carbon footprint, sometimes dramatically. So if you're going to be looking at what are those key areas, one is energy. 40% in the United States, 40% of carbon emissions come from our energy sector. I'm not quite sure what that number is in Colombia, maybe a bit lower, maybe a bit higher. But by shifting to a renewable resource for energy, whether that's solar or wind, or doing some sort of PPA like power purchase agreement, you can drastically reduce your carbon emissions. And another aspect with energy is like actually just using less energy. So there's been a big shift in the museum community to looking at temperature a little bit more closely. Like we don't have to be freezing cold or we don't have to be terribly warm, but just finding like a little bit more of a moderate range. And then another large sector or chunk of it is shipping, right? So pretty much you just want to keep things on the ground as much as possible. And that can shift to like maybe not FedExing the book or making sure that you plan a little bit in advance so that you can do a ground shipment versus air freighting something. So I think it goes back to that like saying we learned growing up, like haste makes waste, right? So planning ahead usually reduces the carbon footprint. Also just like catering to local shows. And I think with COVID, we really saw like local is the new global, but doing a local show within your country or within your state or even within your town really helps reduce that carbon footprint. I worked with Parker Gallery, which is a Los Angeles-based gallery that often exhibits California-based artists, deceased or living. And they did a show and the footprint was like 2 metric tons of carbon, which is exceptionally low, in part because they, did something local to their state. So I think that those things are interesting. But per what Siobhan was saying about shipping, there's a couple of stats that come to mind. One is the Gary Hume exhibition in 2019. He insisted that the gallery Matthew Marks shipped by sea freight rather than by air, and it reduced the carbon footprint of that exhibition by 96%. Like boom. So right there, for that chunk, you've really achieved your Paris Accord goals, and you've made a great statistic that Danny Cheevers wrote into a paper, and then people could learn from. So it's both educational and like action oriented. Another statistic is that Frieze Art Fair did their first carbon audit in 2007, shifted to diesel fuel, and they reduced their carbon footprint by a bit over 60% for their scope 1, scope 2 carbon. So I think that's quite interesting. But in volunteering time over the last couple of years in doing these carbon calculations, it's been really a pleasure to see institutions sign on in their own innovative way. So like the Hirshhorn came on and they said, we want to do the first like traveling exhibition where we'd actually calculate not just our footprint, but what does it look like when it goes to the next institution and the next museum. And I think that that was something I had never really thought through or thought about in that manner. PS1, MoMA, we just worked with Greg Bordowitz. And that was a show where the curatorial staff and the managing director was really smart. And he's like, we want to calculate everything. We want to know what like the wall vinyl is. We want to, know what the works are. But again, that came from local storage. So it ended up being a rather low footprint. So I think just focusing on a couple key areas, your energy source, keeping things on the ground, not flying as much. And when you do fly, try to get more done, like do less trips, stay a little longer, get more like substance in there, is a great way to lower carbon emissions. And also, I think, have just a more thoughtful experience about doing the things we enjoy doing every day.
And one of my last questions, and we're running up against an hour, so I hesitate to bring up such a kind of a complex issue, and Haley, this is for you, but I think it can open to everyone as well who's engaged. Conservation is one kind of possible outcome of all these practices that we're talking about. And I know, Haley, you're involved with a number of very different, very complex land conservation practices. And maybe you could just, I hate to use the metaphor, but in summary, just describe kind of the range of what people are doing as one of their outcomes of their carbon audits.
Yeah, great. So, there's a lot of different things that people focus on. I think the number one focus is you do your calculation and you want to have some good records, but you want to just focus on reduction. So you're focusing as much as possible on reducing your carbon emissions, getting them down to hopefully 50% or more, 2030 or sooner. That said, what about the other 50%? And so there's a range of initiatives to work on carbon compensation, carbon drawdown, legal methods, et cetera, to compensate or to sequester that remaining 50%. You've heard probably in the news of something called direct air capture. Those are machines that humans are trying to develop to draw down carbon emissions. It's very early technology, and we don't yet have the technology for the planet to be able to do that in a sustainable, affordable way. Maybe in the future we will. Another approach is legal support, and there's an organization called Client Earth, which works on closing down factories that are mega polluters, and that's an organization that Gallery Climate Coalition has really taken under their wing and is stewarding. And I think with that in mind, GCC is supporting something called strategic carbon funds or strategic climate funds, where you make wholesale donations to organizations. Land conservation is one. Land conservation is a natural climate solution. It's not a man-made one. It was here before we existed. And trees are an incredible technology for carbon sequestration. And one of the things we do with Art for Acres is to protect old growth forests. So you're not only engaging the carbon that trees are bringing down on a daily basis, but you're protecting the below ground stores of carbon, this incredible historic carbon that's been underground for thousands of years as these ecosystems have photosynthesized. So in that regards, we really predominantly work with indigenous-led or community-directed conservation, which means landscapes that have 10 to 30 years of community request for the conservation. And by indigenous-led, that means that we fund the people who live on the landscape in doing the conservation goals that they see fit for the land in which they live. That's exceptionally important. And it's really also fantastic to see a whole ecosystem from human to animal to plant conserved in perpetuity in the voice and the language by the culture and the people who are from that location. So I think that there's a range of things you can do, whether you're buying an offset, which is a retail product, or whether you're donating to conservation or legal means, which is a nonprofit wholesale direction in which funds go to support carbon sequestration. But I think it's really important to get involved and to, be responsible for drawing down this gas, which is a waste byproduct of pretty much everything we do. So thanks for the question, Alex.
No, thanks to you, Haley, and thanks to each of our panelists. I think as we butt up against an hour, I think it's always good practice to kind of conclude or panel by asking if there are any kind of, we're talking about a number of very urgent topics, although thinking about them proactively and optimistically, are there any particular topics that for any of our panelists feel specifically urgent that we have not kind of yet brought to the table, or that you'd want to share with the audience here today? Not to put you on the spot. And if not, I will answer my own question, which is, I hope that from the panel today, everybody who is watching at home or at work, who's an art worker, who is not an art worker, if you have the autonomy within your space of work to begin thinking critically about your carbon emissions and impact overall in terms of waste, I hope that this conversation spurs you to take action, or to speak with your colleagues in order to make sure that your organization, your friends are kind of acting with the future in mind. I think as an art worker myself, it's important that the institution of which I'm a part is in dialogue with the people who are doing the really hard work to ensure that our planet remains a safe place for us to live and work, and also that our work day to day carries on with the values that we really kind of preach and pontificate in some of our cultural and creative practice. So I hope that we can live up to that and to some extent serve as regional models in Miami. I want to thank each of you for the hard work and organization, and a lot of the work that you do as well is dual-fold. It's internal, it's practice driven, but also communication driven. I want to thank you for participating in both of those regards today, and look forward to continuing the dialogue. So thanks to each of you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thanks as well. Thank you to Artbo for hosting us on this occasion, and appreciate it. Have a great day, have a great weekend. And for those of you in Colombia, I hope to see you soon on our travels throughout the city.
Great.
Bye.
Thank
Be
you.
well. Thank you.
Bye.